All right, we're live. Intro cut off. So episode for you today, and it's good to see that we got somebody that likes to wear that big old orange, that on hair. But guys, if you don't know, this is Deck Talk Podcast, and I am Colin Burnett.
And I am Norman Lee. We have a great show lined up for you tonight, but first, this episode is brought to you by Firefly Outdoor and Marine, the #1 navigational lights on the water. Truly fishing under a full moon with 100% reduction in glare. But here's the thing, you have to get out and check out their all new store stacker box. Now, bank fishing, surf fishing just became more easier and more enjoyable with the new Firefly Stacker Box. It is made out of high impact resistant resin and has a lockable handle. With plenty of tackle storage space along with a built-in cooler, makes for an enjoyable night of fishing. Pair your shore stacker with the Firefly Stern Light and you will have hours of fishing fun with non-blinding light when hardly any bugs. Go to www.fireflymarine and out or www.fireflymarine.com. Use discount code DECKTALK10 for instant savings. Again, www.fireflymarine.com. Make sure to use that discount code DECKTALK10 for instant savings and get your shore stacker and your navigational lights by Firefly today. Wow. Whew. Got that all out.
Twister right there.
Man, I tell you what, now that we got all the business end of the stuff out of the way, we got a great show lined up for you tonight, guys. We have a great guest. You know what, Colin? I have been looking forward to this episode since we booked this man. I've known Steve for the better part of probably, I would guess, 20 years now. But anyway, here we go. Our guest tonight is a 3-time winner on the FLW Tour. He is the inaugural winner of the Forrest Wood Cup Championship in 1986. And yes, there could only be one first-time winner of the Forrest Wood Cup, and that is the man right here, the host of the most popular fishing outdoor radio show in Florida, Hooked Up with Steve and Deb, and has been a premier guide on Lake Okeechobee for over 25 years. The man, the myth, the legend, Steve Daniel. What's going on? How was that introduction, Steve? Was that on point?
Hey guys, man, you're making me feel good.
What's going on, man? Great to see you again, dude. How you doing?
Oh, we're doing great. Yeah, man, you had to move up to Chickamauga Lake, but I miss seeing that Tuscaroran boat go all over Lake Okeechobee in these local tournaments down here.
Yeah, right, man. No, you know what? Colin was ragging a little bit on your volunteers hat there. You're sporting on your head, of course. You guys were originally from up in this area right here, but I told Colin, man, he was ragging on me a little bit. You can take the boy out of Florida, can't take Florida out of the boy. I'm still a Gator. I'm still a Gator and a Buck through and through, man.
Yeah, I'm
But
sorry.
yeah, right. There you go. I got ragging coming in from all over the place, man.
Hey, I mean, he just needs to jump right on in.
Yeah, right.
So,
Hey, I get ragged all the time. That's all right. I have thick skin, man. But anyway, Steve, anyway, we're going to get rolling on this, man. Um, we have a bunch of questions lined up for you. And again, man, your accolades in the fishing industry is just off the charts, man. We talked a little bit on the intro about the inaugural victory in the first ever Forrest Wood Cup. But let's get started. Let's go back a little bit more in time, man. Uh, what is your earliest memory of fishing? Way back when you were a kid, were you always involved in the sport from a kid? Where you just love the outdoors, or what's your earliest memory?
I always liked fishing, and Debbie always says I was born to fish. But Yeah, man, I fished farm. We never owned a boat till I was 21 years old. I fished farm ponds, little creeks and stuff, and you learn so much about fishing by fishing small ponds and things like that. I think most of the stuff that I learned back then because Norm, you're around the fish when you're fishing around a half acre or 1 acre pond. You're on Lake Okeechobee, you don't know if you're around them or not.
Yeah,
So
Everything
it's
looks good.
you really learn a lot because you can go to a pond one day and catch them really good, and you go back the next day and you would swear there wasn't one in it, but you're learning something all the time. You're learning that the habits of those fish, and that's what I try to teach all these kids that come down. I try to teach them to understand what they're trying to catch, and
yeah,
it's a complicated deal sometimes. All these kids that come down here and fish with me on Okeechobee, they're all really, really good anglers. A lot better than I was when I was their age.
yeah.
A good little story was I fished with a couple of kids from Colorado several years ago, and you can probably go back to the high school national championships. It was on Kentucky Lake, I believe it was,
Right.
and two of these kids, they don't have a lot of bass fishing in Colorado. So these two kids qualified for the championship, and the first year they never caught a fish. They zeroed, and I fished with one of them. One of them's mom brought him down, and I fished on Okeechobee, and we were catching them on jerk baits, long A bombers. And the kid asked me, he said, they qualified again because, like I say, there weren't a lot of clubs in Colorado. They
Right.
didn't do a lot of bass fishing in Colorado. So these two kids made it again. And they said, "Man, we just want to catch one fish. We just want to go across the stage." And they said, "What kind of tip can you give me?" I tell them, "Just do what we're doing here. We're catching fish on a long A bomb or a jerk bait." I said, "You can catch fish anywhere in the country on a jerk bait." I said, "Just go fish any bridge you see, a bridge piling, a boat dock. Just throw your jerk bait around. You're gonna catch some fish. You're not gonna win the tournament, but you're gonna catch some fish." Those two kids won that event. It
Wow.
was in a summertime tournament on Kentucky Lake. Now, how many people would think you could catch fish shallow? I think it was in July or August on Kentucky Lake when all the local kids were out there throwing crankbaits on those ledges where
On the
Van
ledges. Yep.
Dam and Horton and all of them always fished out there. But these kids wore them out. So, there are no rights and wrongs. There are no rights and wrongs.
No.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true, man. Yeah, me and Colin got out on our. I don't get a chance to get out and bank fish hardly at all anymore. Which we got out about when was it, Colin? Last year sometime, and actually went to a buddy's of Colin's had a farm pond, and we went out and just kicked the bank for all day, and that was some of the funnest fishing I think I've done uh, probably in the last 20 years of having a boat to go out in,
Well,
and I'm like,
Norman, we
man, we need
talked
to do
about
that
it.
more often.
Right. We talked about it when right after we got done, and and we talked about like how we went back to our roots, going back fishing
Yeah,
from the bank, but it was refreshing because it was like a reset because
yeah,
after going, we did have cameras going and stuff, but it really wasn't it really wasn't like we was trying to do anything for the camera. We was just pretty much going out there just catching a bunch of bass out
yeah, yeah.
and somebody caught a duck. I won't say any names, but Norman caught a duck.
You won't say any names, right? That sucker just got in the way of my bait.
So
But
You talk about going back to fishing farm ponds and stuff like that. I do a lot of bluegill fishing in the summertime here on Okeechobee, and there's just something about throwing a cricket out there with a bobber and watching that bobber float around. All of a sudden, that bobber goes down. Man, it takes you back when you was a kid, and
no,
you never get tired of that. You just
no,
never get tired of that.
no.
no, absolutely not. Yeah, I remember as a kid. I mean, I'm talking 5, 6, 7 years old. Walking down to the lake. Of course, we didn't live on the lake, but we had lake access down at the end of our road that we lived on in Lake Placid, Florida. But I remember going down and making bread balls with a little with a little cotton mixed in with it, so it didn't come off your hook. Going down, and back in the day, you could go down and I guess they were golden shiners. You might know a little bit more about the true name of them, Steve, but these shiners looked like half of them you could fillet. They were so big. But I remember catching those big. I mean, some of them were like 12, 14 inches long, and they were different shiners than we're used to buying in the bait stores. And I remember hooking those on a regular bass hook with the bobber and tossing it out, and just watching your. Never did catch whatever was hitting on them, but your core could just start singing across the canal. And I mean, that was some fun times, and it's kind of stuff we don't do anymore, but we remember doing it, and it's stuff that we think about, and it's like, man, I would love to do that again, just because it was so fun back then, just hanging out with a bread ball and a little hair hook.
You're talking about those wild shiners. Those are actually golden river shiners. That's
All
the
right.
main diet of the bass here on Lake Okeechobee. And nobody loves fishing with wild shiners any better than I do. It's kind of, if you got somebody coming to Okeechobee and they only have a day or two to try to catch one of these big monsters, live bait is definitely the best way of doing it. And it's a lot of fun too, because when a bass gets after that big 12-inch shiner like you're talking about,
Yeah.
it's like a small war going on out there. I mean, that shiner will not lay out there and let that fish eat him. He's going to fight for his life. It really stinks to be a live shiner in Lake Okeechobee because the bass wins almost every time.
Yeah. 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 I
But we
know.
got a buddy of ours that he guides on Chickamauga, and he does a lot of live baits. And about 2.5, 3 years ago, he caught what was it? He caught 10 fish. Well, let's say 10 fish bag. The first five was over 50, and the second bag was pushing 42.
Yeah.
And so
It's easier to feed them than fool them. That's kind of what they say down here in Okeechobee. It's
that's
easier
true.
to throw live bait out there and catch one because you don't really have to trick them. The bait does all the work. But
It does it
I tell you,
all.
you're talking about Chickamauga Lake, man. That just gets me all fired up a little bit because that's when my career first started. I was actually in a little bass club there, and I was in the Harrison Bass Club right there on Chickamauga Lake. That club is still in
Still
existence
go.
today,
Yeah.
and flipping it just came on the scene. I was the only one in the Harrison Bass Club that had a flipping stick, and for about a year, I was winning every tournament. That's before you could buy a flipping jig. We had to make our own jigs. We had to tie ski rope around the shank of it to make a weed guard, and but I learned a lot about that, and I got really, really good at it. And I was working at Sequoia Nuclear Plant, and we were doing a refueling outage up there. And there was a gentleman. His name was Wimpy Wolf. He owned Southeastern Meats right there off Lee Highway. And he said, "Man, the World's Fair tournament's coming to Knoxville, Tennessee." And it was in 1982. He said, "Man, I'll pay your entry fee and your expenses and everything if you want to go up there and fish it." Because he knew I was really on top of this flipping deal. And I said, "Man, I can't get any time off. We were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And it was the first refueling outage they ever did at the nuclear plant there. So we couldn't get any time off. But make a long story a little bit shorter, I conned my boss into letting me have that week off. His name was Leonard Ezel. And he was a Boilermaker foreman. And he was having to call in sick for me every day because they wanted to know where everybody was when that head was off that reactor. So I mean, he was calling in sick for me every day, and here I am up in Knoxville, Tennessee, fishing in a bass tournament. But the funny thing is, you know, that's the first time I ever met Forrest Wood and Roland Martin. I mean, it was only the third tournament they ever paid $50,000 to the winner, and I was scared to death up there. I mean, I'm fishing around these legends, that I've only read about.
Right.
Never met one of them ever. And but anyway, I was real one dimensional. I carried my jigs in my pocket and had a bottle of number one Uncle Josh pork rind. That's all I used. Pork rind and a black pork chunk and a brown jig. and I was winning all these tournaments on it. But I nearly won that tournament. I finished second. I beat the best guys in the world with my lures in my pocket and a bottle of pork rind. And anyway, long story short, Sunday sports page in Chattanooga News Free Press. TVA employee wins $20,000 in bass tournament, and my boss like to got fired over the. We all got in trouble, but he about got fired over that little deal right there. And they told me, they said, Steve, you're gonna have to fish or work. You're killing us. And I met Roland Martin there, and I met Bert Fisher, his assistant. And Roland had just bought this marina down here on Lake Okeechobee. And he said, man, we need some guys down there. He said, why don't you come down there and guide with us? So I took a year off from work and never went back. I got really lucky in my first year. I qualified for the Bassmaster Classic. It was out on the Arkansas River, Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Rick Clunn won the one the year before, and I read everything I could read about that tournament. Me and Dale went out there and practiced for 8 days, like a burn up. It was in August. Classics were in the summertime back then, and it was so hot. But I was the only one caught a limit every day of that tournament, and I finished fourth, and I qualified for the match fishing deal. And but anyway, that's how my career got started. And at that arena right there, I think there were 30,000 people that weigh in, and I was hooked after that. I knew this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And it was a little easier to get sponsors back then. They can actually come looking for the real good anglers and the ones that could speak and can talk good. But boy, it's a different world out there now. There's thousands of these college kids out there that want to become a professional bass fisherman, and it's really hard to get the sponsorships. And you guys know what that's all about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's you. It's very much of a grind, and you have to work for it. And Norman and I, we tell because we have people ask us. Mainly, it's kids though that ask us about sponsorships and stuff, and we tell them it's don't think about what the company can do for you. You got to think what you can do
What you
for that
do for
company, and because that's all they're thinking about
yeah.
is can this person make some sales for me to where I can make $1 off of them.
Yeah, there's too
Yeah,
many. There's too
if,
many younger anglers out there, and I talk to a lot of kids on the subject as well. And there's too many younger anglers that want to, they want sponsorship. They want people on their jerseys or their shirts. But what the kids don't understand is a lot of these kids they're looking just to get free product. And I try to instill in these kids that's not what it's about. You can't look at it that way before you even think what that company's gonna do for you. You gotta think what could you do for the company, and think that way for a few years before you even start thinking that other direction. Because a lot of these kids today, they want to look the part, but they don't want to do the work to get the part.
yeah, that patch on that jersey don't sell product, and
No.
and I fish with a lot of them. I fish with a lot of these high school kids that come down to Okeechobee, and I tell them, I said, if you want to compete with those guys, first of all, you got to be a really good angler, and you got to be good at everything, and then you got to set yourself apart from all these other guys. Now, what can you do to make yourself stand out to one of these marketing guys over here that work for these companies? Why would he want you over all these other guys? And sometimes it's just what you say on stage. Nobody wants to hear how you had a bad day in a tournament. They want you to say something that's interesting that the crowd's gonna like. And it's like Jimmy Houston was always the best. Jimmy Houston was a comedian, and there's a bunch of those guys, but they set themselves apart from everybody else. And you might be able to do it in a lot of different ways. Everybody wants to be a Kevin Van Dam, but all these good anglers aren't going to be able to do that. But there's a lot of jobs out there in the fishing world that you could lead yourself into. And I know a lot of them. A lot of them are into, working with like JM Productions, all these people that work with these camera crews and stuff. And there's a lot of jobs out there in the fishing world where you're out there doing something. You're around fishing, and I tell you that there's nothing better than being a professional bag angler. But there's a lot of other guys having a lot of good times out there too, just being able to be around it.
Yeah, just be in the sport itself. But here's the thing too. You know, you could be a great tournament. You could be a great fisherman. But to compete at that level against the Kevin Van Dams, the Gerald Swindells, the Rick Cluns, the Gary Kleins, to compete at that level, it takes more than just being a great fisherman. You gotta have it right up here. If you don't have it mentally, where you can't get spun out, you don't want you. That's the biggest thing with a lot of anglers. And I'll be totally honest with you, Steve. That was my problem when I was competing uh, in those bigger tournaments. Is I would, and I'll be the first to admit it, I did not have it up here. I would get spun out too easy. Even before the tournament even started, I started thinking. And you know, you could be a great tournament angler, but if you don't have it mentally, where you don't get spun out, you don't think, you just go out and have fun, and just fish. You're not going to make it against them guys.
Yeah, Rick Lunn, I always felt like was one of the best tournament fishermen out there, and he was the most dangerous when he wasn't catching anything in practice because now he's still looking. He's not doing the same thing he did yesterday, and just because you caught fish one of the practice days, that doesn't mean you're going to go back there the next day and catch them or during a tournament.
Right.
But you got to have these backup plans. You got to have most of those guys have a plan. They want to have they want to have a certain amount of fish by a certain time, and if they don't have it, they move to something else. And like I say, it's a complicated game. It's really there's nothing easy about it. There's
No.
nothing easy about it. Although you may have some easy days, but day in day out in a whole season, man, you just can't have a bad tournament. You've got to have a decent tournament everywhere you go. And
Yeah.
man, I tell you what, with all the anglers that are out there now, and you can ask Kevin Van Dam or any of these guys now, the competition and these tours right now are stronger than it's ever been, and a lot of it's technology. A lot of it's the sonar units. You guys are seeing a lot of that on Chickamauga Lake, and like I say, there's more to it than that, though. I remember Kevin Van Dam told me one time that these fish were getting so used to feeling those pings of those sonar units because those things are strong. When they start feeling something day in day out, they get a little weary of it. And he pull up on some stuff. Once he found the fish, he'd turn everything off, and because he didn't want those fish getting a heads up that somebody's up there getting ready to hurt them.
Yeah.
And I had Doug Hannon on my show several times, and Doug was one of the smartest guys I know. He had 26 patents in the fishing world. He was a scientist. He studied their habits, and he said, fish aren't intelligent, but once they have a bad experience with something, they tend to remember that, and whether it might be a certain bait, a certain noise that a bait produces, and that's why a lot of guys saying, I'm not throwing a crankbait that makes a lot of rattling. I'm throwing one that don't rattle just
Yeah.
because it's different than everybody else. But like I say, it's stuff we can talk about all day. This an hour show. We could talk about this for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
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 That's like my favorite bait, um, like crankbait to be throwing, like especially during the summertime, is like a balsal wood, and you don't see people throwing the balsal wood crankbaits anymore, or hardly ever anymore. And I just, my grandfather had them, and that's how I got to learn how to throw them. And so I just kept on. I mean, even like you see back behind me, I got that's some of his baits that from when he passed away. I just hung them up on my wall. but
Yeah.
the but the balsa wood to me was I had a better, and it might have all been in my head, but that's what I was thinking is there's no rattle to it or anything like that. It's just more or less off of vibration and reaction off of it. It's how
Yeah.
I
When I
feel.
won that first FLW championship, the cup, I was throwing a diving killer B2, Bagley bait, balsa wood bait, and the color of it was '09. It was black back, chartreuse sides. There's more yellow than chartreuse, and orange belly. And I guarantee you, half the pros, especially if they're over 40 years old, have a whole bunch of that color and that type of bait. The old B2 and the
Yeah.
B3 Bagley. Rick Clun won a tournament throwing that B3 Bagley up in Truman Lake one time, and he showed me the bait he was catching them on. and it didn't have hardly any paint left on it because they only had one, and they about ate the paint off that thing. But he wouldn't let me have that one. He gave me one of his old RC3s. He said, "Don't buy this one. It's good, but it just hangs up a lot more."
Yeah,
But those guys, yeah,
a
go
lot of
ahead.
those old baits that the kind of the classic type baits, like Colin's talking about, some of those balsa wood old crank baits. The thing about it is, man, they still work today, but you never see people throwing them because people want to, because the $25 crankbait just has it's a prettier bait, so the people throws it. But the thing about it is, those old vintage baits, they still work good today, as good today as they did back in the day, and probably better because the fish haven't seen them in 40 years.
Yeah, they put off a lot more vibration than some of
Yeah,
them too. They push a lot more water. They always had a wider wobble. That old
yeah,
Balsa had a wide wobble.
It did.
What that does, and Doug Hannon said another thing I learned from him. He said most baits don't put off any vibration. He said the only ones that put off vibration are the ones that change direction, the ones that push from side to side. And when I won that tournament, Lake Sinclair, the Forrest Wood Cup, that first year, you couldn't see that crankbait 2 inches in the water. It was solid, muddy water, but those fish could feel it because it was pushing water. They could find it with their lateral lines, and that's how they feed, when they can't see baits. And here in Okeechobee, it's just kind of the opposite. Our fish sight feed so much because our water stays so clear. We can get a little water, gets a little muddy, and they're harder to catch, but they're just so used to sight feeding, they're not used to using the lateral lines to find baits. So that's just, man, we can go off in never land talking about that stuff.
not to change the subject from what we're talking about, but talking about Okeechobee real quick before we lead away from that. How's Okeechobee doing right now? I know with the hydrilla situation's a little bit kind of iffy down there for the last 5 or 10 years, but how's the clarity of the lake now that with all the stuff they got going on down there?
Let me
Could you
tell
still
you, it's
find
just
the water?
different. And the guys that are complaining about the most just haven't figured it out.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things I liked about Okeechobee. It was a challenge. This lake, I don't care, every year was different. Never, no 2 years were ever exactly the same. And, we lost a lot of high drill this year, but I know, Norm, you probably kept up with some of the weights in these tournaments.
yeah,
There was a tournament in June, I believe it was, which was, it might have been in late May, when there was, with five fish limits, there were 25 fish limits over 30 pounds in one day.
Yeah.
You
yeah,
don't get that anywhere. I mean, Texas, you name it, they don't catch fish like that anywhere. And yet you got guys complaining about Okeechobee because they can't catch them, but they hadn't figured it out yet. Some of the guys are still catching. It still takes almost 25 to 30 pounds every week in these
yeah.
little club tournaments and stuff. But they are harder to catch and they're harder to find. But that's one of the things I always loved about this lake, man. You never get bored fishing Lake Okeechobee. Now, if I guided on a lake that had certain ledges and certain boat docks and certain grass lines that were always in the same place, I'd get bored with that real fast. But down here, man, it's a new lake almost every time you go out.
Yeah. Yeah, that tournament you're talking about was the Roland Martin Marina tournament trail. And I think Scott Martin actually fished that one, and I think they came back with like almost 30.
28.
They had
They had
28. They had
28.
28 and change.
And
They're
they
And
thought they were
27
going to
pounds, I
win it.
think, finished 48.
Yeah, they
Scott was
thought they
coming
were
back
going
with
to win it. And
28
he
and
said that they
change
came in
because they
like
were way up
30th.
there, and they came in like 30th.
Yeah, I tell you,
But I can remember I seen something during that time. There was like 3 weeks to a month time span to where, I mean, Okeechobee just went off the chain to where they had monster bags coming out of it.
Yeah,
a lot of those places that were catching them too, the FWC did some aerial spraying. They went way back in and opened up some areas that were full of cattails. And some of the places where they were catching those big sacks of fish were some of the ugliest places you would ever want to fish. Just a bunch of dead bulrushes. It looked like a bomb went off out there. But those fish, there was something they liked about those areas. I don't know what it was, but I know they liked it. And within another year, those areas are going to be completely different. We're going to have submergent grasses growing. We're going to have lily pads growing, and it's going to look completely different next year. It could be even better, but I had one of the best winters I've ever had on Lake Okeechobee last year. I didn't catch a single fish over 10 pounds, but I can't tell you how many 7 to 9.5 pounders I caught. I had one girl, she caught a 23-year-old girl caught 4 over 7 on almost back to back calves. And it was like that all winter long. And I really expect with the high water we got on Lake Okeechobee right now, I expect it to be the same this winter.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome. That is insane.
So, what makes Okeechobee change? Because I've never fished Okeechobee, but what makes it change from year to year, or even like how you saying it could change day to day?
Change
What's
overnight.
what's making it change?
It's usually the water levels. It can get really, really shallow where we're fishing way out in the middle of the lake. We're fishing out of sight of land sometimes on these reefs that run across the middle. And like right now, you've got 6, 7 feet of water in around the grass beds where you got these real pretty pennyworth mats and stuff. All the guys like pinching their baits through that stuff. I like throwing the shiners on the edge of it and try to bring those fish out. But the thing about the shiner fishing, those fish that are under that mat will feel that shiner. They know that shiner's in distress. He's got a hook in him. He's dragging a float around, and those shiners will bring them out. Artificial fishing, man, sometimes they get under there. They're not really feeding, and that's the thing. That's another thing I learned from Doug Hannon too. He, he said, I used to play with our cats all the time. He said fish don't just feed all the time, and you got to make your bait look really, really crippled. And both those FLW tournaments that I won down here, when I beat Roland, I was throwing a long A bomber, and the last one in 2000, I was throwing a number 14 Husky jerk, big bait, and it was 32 degrees. There were guys never caught a fish, and I was like catching. It was like I was fishing a lake nobody else was on. And the reason, the fact that those lures I was throwing in that cold water, I was fishing for fish that weren't feeding. It's the nature of predators to clean up things that are injured. That's why you want to always work your bait. I tell these kids, don't just throw your bait out there and reel it in. Make that thing look really, really crippled, because there's going to be times when they're feeding really good and you can catch them fast, you throw it out there. But the majority of the day, you've got to make that fish feel like there's something injured out there. And like I say, it's the nature of any predator to clean up things that are injured. You may not catch every fish out there, but as long as you can catch some fish when they're not feeding, you're one step ahead of the game.
Right, right.
Yeah, right.
Now, like you just was talking about the anglers that are coming up. We've got a question from one of the viewers. Does today's angler have it easier or harder to make it to the pros?
I'd say it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder. The technology you have to have on your boat, it costs so much money. Back when I started, man, we had those little 350 Rangers. We had a flasher unit on our boat. They didn't cost anything. Well, back then, I guess we thought they cost a lot, but entry fees were low. But here's what I tell all the kids. That's a good question. I said, best way to learn, you can be on one of your high school teams or be in just a local bass club. And when you get to the point where you can kind of dominate the guys in your bass club, then it's time to step up to the next level. It might be BFLs or something. And when you start doing good there and you feel your confidence level gets really good and you're getting better all the time and you're constantly finishing you don't have to win, but if you just constantly make the top 10, then it's time to step up to the next level. But if you can't dominate those guys in your bass club, save your money, because you're not going to compete. Those guys are so good in technology and everything. But like I say, it's much harder now to get started because only a rich person can do it. But luckily, a lot of these kids in these high school teams, daddy's going to buy them a boat. He's going to buy them a boat and all the equipment he needs just to have his kid fishing so he'll stay out of trouble. And
Yeah,
that's where all this kind of got started. This high school fishing got started. The industry started it because they knew if the kid wanted to fish and try to become a daddy's going to buy him a boat. He's going to buy
right.
him some kind of boat, anything to keep them off the street, keep them off the phones, keep them out there in nature, keeps them out there on the lakes. That's just a good thing for daddy and the kids. So even to this day, that's a big part of it. Just keeping these kids off their phone, getting them in the outdoors. But yeah, not everybody's gonna make it, but you can tell pretty quick if you're dominating the guys you're fishing against. It's time to keep stepping up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you're a younger kid and your dream is to try to make it at that level, or I mean, the whole thing is spend time on the water. Even when you're not fishing a local club tournament, get out there and fish. The only way you're going to learn and get better is go fishing, and just don't fish to fish. Fish to learn. Try new things. Try new techniques. Kind of get master your craft before you even. You could actually master your craft before you even have a boat, just as long as you keep doing it, keep going to your local fishing hole, even fishing from the bank.
Yeah,
You
we
got
talked
to
about
trust
that
it.
fishing these ponds, but and I tell them all the time. And when I got here in Okeechobee, I almost never run my boat over about 35 miles an hour. And I've had some of these kids say, well, "Why don't you crank this thing up and run like all these other guys?" Because there's so much I'm going to miss. I'm constantly scanning the water for a minnow jumping or
Yeah,
maybe some bulrushes shaking or something. And if you're running 90 miles an hour everywhere you go, you don't see that.
yeah,
Even I tell them, just stop your boat sometimes. If you find a little group of fish somewhere, don't just keep fishing. Put the power poles down and just sit back and watch. See what you see. See if you see a minnow jumping. See if you see fish feeding. You won't see that if you just go through there really quick. You gotta be aware and just like I say, one minnow jumping. I can't tell you how many times on Okeechobee the gentleman that I bought my Ranger from, he lives in North Georgia up there. He lives in Calhoun, Georgia, and I bought his older Ranger. He bought a new one from Dalton Marine down there. But we were going out through the monkey box. I was going slow. I was driving his boat, and I saw one minnow jump. It was slick as glass that day, and I saw this was like 10 o'clock in the morning. I saw one minnow jump out of the water, so I just stopped. And I just kind of eased up. He asked me, he said, what's going on? I said, I saw a minnow, I think, jump over there. She's watching me. All of a sudden, I seen another one jump. I said, let's go over there. I bet we caught 100. We were throwing rattle traps and topwater baits. But, if I'd have been running 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, I would have never seen that, and I'd have run right by him. So always be aware of your surroundings and just be safe, main thing. Just go slow and, uh, and just watch. Just be aware.
uh,
And one of the tournaments I did really good in too was it was FLW. No, it was a Bassmaster tournament on uh, is out of St. Clair, and I always went down the Detroit River and fishing in the mouth of Lake Erie. And I was out there in a big grass bed. There wasn't nobody out there. And I was going down through there, and Deb always packed me a lunch. He said, "Y'all, when you fish practice days from daylight to dark, you got to eat. You got to drink plenty of water. You got to eat." And I just sat down in the boat, and I was eating me a sandwich, and I was just watching. Same deal. I saw a minnow jump out of the water and I just kind of kept watching. I caught over 100 bass a day in that tournament. I finished 11th. I didn't make the top 10 cut, but I had a really, really good tournament. But if I'd have been going through there and not watching, I'd have never found that little group of fish. And they moved on me about 100 yards every day. I had to hunt them every day. But
yeah.
once I found them,
You're
man, I had them
gone.
dialed in. I had the bait they wanted, and it was on then.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
said about I know Okeechobee, you're driving about 30 miles an hour, and you seen that one bait fish come out of the water with something chasing it. So you stopped and you started watching. How many anglers would actually see that one bait come out of the water, driving their boat through there, and not even stop, and
Yeah,
just
most
keep
of them
going?
wouldn't see it. Most of them
Yeah,
wouldn't
Well,
see it, and like I say, you never see a minnow jump out of the water. You may not see a fish chasing him, but you'll never see a shad or a shiner jump out of the water unless he's seen something that made him do it. And I've actually caught fish, when they were schooling like that, but I'd never see a single fish chasing anything. Yet there might be, hundreds of bass in that area. I don't know if I was just there when they weren't chasing bait or what, but I know one thing, they really like those lipless baits when you can find them schooling out there like that. And everybody's got their own favorite lipless bait. You talked about a while ago, all the new baits, and and the older baits and stuff. The most confusing part for people nowadays, if you're just getting started in bass fishing and you go to a Bass Pro Shop and you walk down the aisle, you just walk down the fishing line aisle, it'll absolutely make your head spin. They got so much stuff to choose from. But now, how much better would it be if we just went back to the stuff we were using, 30, 40 years ago? Will they still hit a Johnson spoon on Okeechobee? Nobody throws it anymore. Maybe it's time to get some of those old baits back out. The
Yeah.
old Devil's Horse, the old
Yeah.
Devil's Horse has been around 100 years. They
Yeah.
still hit a Devil's Horse on Okeechobee. And
Yeah.
some of those older baits that we've kind of forgotten about have kind of come back around a little bit. But like I say, fish get conditioned. You'll have a year where they're hitting chatterbaits really good, and everybody's throwing a chatterbait. Well, the next year those same fish may not hit that chatterbait because they're a little spookier over that thing. They remembered that thing from last year, and they might want something a little different.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking to these kids, I say, when you find a group of fish and you're catching them on Okeechobee or any lake, and you catch several, and all of a sudden the bite slows down a little bit, change lures. Don't keep throwing the same thing. Throw them a little different look. This is something I learned from Rick Clunn by by learning when he won the Bassmaster Classic in 1984 on the Arkansas River. He won it by 25 pounds. I mean, there wasn't a close second. But he was fishing a stump row where nobody ever fished because it was near a skiing area. And most bass fishermen stay away from skiing areas, but Rick likes that because he knows nobody fishes there. Well, he found this one stump row and he caught him on a 7A bomber. Well, the last day he goes down through there, he made 2 or 3 passes down through there, never had a bite. All he did, he switched crankbaits. He went to a number 7 shad wrap, something that didn't push as much water, and he caught like I think he caught 7 fish that weighed like 25 pounds that last day. But just little things like that. And I've learned this from them. You can learn so much from these other anglers. And it's much more easier to learn nowadays when you're watching them because everything's on TV now. It's a shorter learning curve than it used to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much out there today to learn from too. I mean, you can go to YouTube and pretty much anything you want to learn how to do, anything you want to know, just go to YouTube and there's a video out there for everything. And
Yeah.
and fishing's no different. I go on YouTube all the time if I'm curious about a certain technique that I heard about or see somebody fishing that I want to learn. I go to YouTube and pull it up, and there's a lot of information. I mean, there's nothing that you might want to know that's not on YouTube. So just the outlets for you to learn today is just off the charts. But when you show up at a boat ramp and the guys you're talking about, a lot of your top notch guys, and they'll tell you they never show up at a boat ramp without their ears open. I mean, they're always learning. They're always wanting to pick up things from other people. Just weekend anglers even that they hear talking at the boat ramp because you're never gonna not want to stop learning. No matter how good you get at your craft, you're always gonna learn. And some of the best techniques you can pick up is just keeping your ears open at your local boat ramp, listening to people coming in off the water.
Yeah, you can learn a lot by doing that. But there's so many people out there with a phone and a YouTube channel now. But
Yeah,
if you really want to learn, watch the pros, watch the Bassmaster Elite guys,
Yeah.
watch the Major League Fishing guys that because I've seen so many videos. Man, I can just tell it makes me mad that it's on there because they don't know any more than anybody else out there. But they got a phone and a YouTube channel,
yeah,
and like
Yeah.
I say, there's so much junk out there. But if you're watching the pros, if you're watching the head guys, have a guy you really like. Like if you want a shallow water fisherman, you want to learn shallow water fishing, go to the guys the Denny Browers and the guys from years ago. Uh, there's so many of them. You want to learn how to fish deep, watch some of the old Aaron Martin videos. He brought drop shotting to the East Coast from California. And he's the one that started that whole mess. And it's just because he was really good at it. He brought it over here and made it work for him. Yeah, we miss old Aaron, but I tell you what, he was a great guy, and I always like going. We always stayed in campgrounds together. And when we traveled in our buses the last several years, we were out there, Aaron, he'd always be out there at night. It might be 11, 12 o'clock at night. He'd be in his boat working on his tackle and stuff. And I'd always walk up to him. He had this big light he'd put out there. And if I knew he went to Bass Pro Shop that day, I'd be hunting his receipt. I'd be looking through his boat. And he'd hold up a crankbait or something. He said, "Isn't that pretty?" But it's something he might not ever throw, but he spent a lot of money at Bass Pro Shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we got a couple of questions for you. Uh, the Here's one that says the young fisherman dreams of the pros, but he's got to learn to love it. Do you are Let's see. Are you seeing that passion with today's angler?
Some of them. It's got to be in your blood. It's got to be somewhere in your blood. You can tell. You can go back from your dad, your grandparents. My dad didn't fish, but obviously there was something in my blood because I was ate up with it. And you can tell a lot of the kids that get out there, they start doing it for a year or two. Now they're sleeping in. They come in 2 hours before dark. The ones that are really ate up with it, they're out there at the crack of dawn and they come in with the lights on,
Yeah.
because there's that one thing you might learn. Dale taught me this one time. We was on the Hudson River and I was having a pretty bad tournament and I was tired and we just came from another tournament somewhere and had about another hour before dark and she convinced me to just stay out there and fish and all of a sudden I caught two or three fish flipping on a big seawall and I had a shot at winning that tournament. But if I hadn't fished that last hour, or she hadn't pushed me to go down that bank, just a little bit further, I would have never got on that pattern. And I made it. I just worked on the pattern every day. But there's a lot of things too. Like when I won that tournament here in 2000, I went in there because I was struggling like everybody else. But when I caught one or two fish, and this is an area that I knew very little about, but I learned more about it every day. And that's what excited me more about it because I knew I didn't know everything there was to know about that area. And I learned a little bit more every day. And it was like I was fishing a lake nobody else was on. But that's a good question. It's got to be in your blood. And you can talk to these kids. I fish with them all the time. You can tell the ones that really, really want it bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Norman and I, we've talked about this uh, quite a bit. This next question, and we've actually even asked a couple of the pros this question. What do you think these guys would do if there was a tournament that was back in the old days, like how the classic, how you just had one tackle box. They gave you a tackle box, you filled that tackle box up, you had two rods on the boat, and you went and you had no electronics besides a flasher. How do you think these guys would turn out if they?
Most of them would be completely lost because when we came out, we had to learn how to triangulate. I've got, I guarantee you, I've got a barge out in the middle of the Potomac River that I can pull up to today. And I found this thing years ago with an old paper graph. Remember the old X15 paper graph? That's
Yeah.
how we found this thing years ago. But I learned how to line this house up with the top of a mountain that had a little cut and then I lined up with a buoy. If that buoy didn't move, with another dock on this other side, and when I get right there, I got everything all lined up. I throw in a certain direction, I'll hit that barge every time. But that's something that the kids don't learn nowadays. It's all
Yeah.
about GPS and waypoints, and man, I tell you what, that's taken a lot away from the sport and some
Yeah.
of the mats. But I tell you what, I guarantee you, if you had a tournament like that, let's say you had the top 100 Bassmaster guys out there, you gave them all a couple of flashers, no GPS, you'd find out who the best fisherman was.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think about like how you was talking about that barge on the Potomac? How critical is boat positioning on that? Just I guess just in general, how critical is boat positioning to be able to catch fish? And because how you were saying you had it, you triangulated all that together, and then you knew that if I threw out this way, that I was catching fish. How so? What the boat positioning for that was critical for you to where you knew, all right, this is how I'm hitting that barge.
You won't know until you've got current. The Potomac River's got current going both ways, tidal water. And
Right.
generally speaking, fish are looking into a current. So you want to throw your bait up and bring it down, but that's not always the case. I was fishing a little rock pile over in General's Road. I don't think they'll even let you fish since 9/11. I don't think they'll even let you go in that channel where all the generals live. The war college is right there. There was one rock. I was throwing a I was throwing a DB3 Bagley bait, and I made 8 or 10, 15 casts the way I thought it ought to be. And I said, well, they must not be on it right now. So I was getting ready to leave. And just as I pulled off, I let the boat drift off of it and I threw back the other direction. And I caught 4 4 pounders and almost 4 casts. So there is no rights and wrongs. You just got to, you know, you can't eliminate everything. You don't eliminate everything that you can, but there are no rights and wrongs. There might be a fish stuck behind a rock or something you don't see, and maybe that crankbait's running by them a certain way. But we all fish through our water way too fast. We don't slow down enough, and we don't really look. Every time you catch a fish, I tell everybody, I said, now when you catch a fish, that fish is trying to tell you something. Put the power poles down and really look at it. Don't make another cast. Where'd that fish come from? Was he on a clump of reeds? Did he come out of that reed? Was he in the open water on the outside? That fish is trying to tell you a story. And once you catch another one and it's in that same situation, now you start to put a pattern together. And that's where Denny Brower hated Lake Okeechobee because he had so much trouble patterning grass. And Mike Sermon, he won the very first FLW tournament they had here in '96, and he was the best I ever seen at patterning grass. He would crank his boat up and run a half a mile and stop and fish one clump of grass and then take off again. He showed me that up on Lake Kissimmee one time. In fact, I made the top five in that tournament fishing a crankbait, but I wasn't catching him very good. I anchored my boat on this little shell bar. I got in the boat with Mike. We were rooming together at the time, me and him and Russ Bringer, and we he showed me what he was doing. We ran around the lake, and he'd pull in. He'd see a certain type of grass, and all of a sudden he'd get a bite. Wouldn't set the hook. He didn't move. He might go another half a mile. He'd pull in there, with the same type of grass. But he had her dialed in to that type of grass. But it changed during the tournament. It changed all during the tournament, so it didn't work out for him. But that's how you put a pattern together in grassy lakes. And that's the hardest thing to do is putting a pattern together. But that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
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 Now
What
we got another question that says, "What is your favorite body of water?"
Well, it's hard to beat Lake Okeechobee, but I really like Lake Okeechobee in the wintertime when fish are spawning here. A lot of people don't realize Lake Okeechobee bass spawn almost 6 months out of the year. They'll start spawning in October, November, and they're still spawning in April and May. But we always have these waves moving in, and you can catch them all day long. Some of the other, I love the Great Lakes in the summertime. I love Lake Erie, St. Clair, uh, just Lake Ontario, Champlain had some really good tournaments on Champlain. But, it's cooler up there than it is down here, and I like catching a big smallmouth. And but in the summertime, so I like the Great Lakes. In wintertime, I like Okeechobee. And I'll tell you another lake I like really well too, and that was down in Del Rio, Texas, there, Lake Amistad. Well, that was one of my favorite lakes.
Right.
I don't know how that is now since all this border stuff's going on down there. I don't know how that's going to affect and all that. Kurt Douglas is still guiding down there, I think. So, in
Yeah.
fact, Danny Brower even moved down there.
What's your favorite artificial technique as far as throwing artificial baits?
Mine's fishing fast baits. Like when my career first started, it was all flipping jigs. It was all jig fishing. But since then, I like the moving baits. I like the jerk bait. And the main reason I like the jerk bait, I can catch fish all day long on it. I can catch fish when they're feeding, and I can catch fish when they're not feeding on a jerk bait. But you have to have certain things. You got to have clear water. They got to see that bait. If they can't see that bait very good, you're not going to be able to tempt him, and you're not going to be able to trick him because he can't see it. So you got to have clear water, and generally the colder the water gets when they're more inactive, that's the best. But I tell you, I like buzzbait fishing too. I love the old half ounce lunker lure. Here on Okeechobee, some of the biggest catches I ever had were
Yeah,
chunking a big old lunker lure. And right
yeah,
now, I take the skirt off of them, I put a swim bait on the back of it, and I still throw that bait a lot.
that's awesome.
Now, if you could go and fish anywhere in the world, where would you want to fish, and what are you targeting?
Well, like if it was this time of year, I'd be on the Great Lakes fishing for smallmouth, and I'd be fishing. I'd still be fishing my jerk bait, but to compete in a tournament up there, you got to be fishing deeper. You got to be able to see those fish. I had a I had a top five on Lake Champlain one time, and I was catching them on that big husky jerk, and I did really good in the tournament. But I watched a video just a couple of years ago of a guy fishing the inland sea area where I like to fish. Now he's out there fishing 40 feet of water, and he's seeing the fish that he's catching right off the bottom. See, those are fish I would have never caught. So it's a different world now.
Yeah,
So the way you have to fish up there, but summertime, it's got to be the great. I love catching those smallmouth. Smallmouth are the dumbest fish in the world. The Great Lake smallmouth. Now the smallmouth on the Tennessee River, like where you guys fish, they're a lot harder to catch. But those Great Lake smallmouth, they're dumber than rocks. If you can find them, you can catch them.
yeah, and it's crazy. I've never fished up in the Great Lakes, but it's crazy to see, like, when you're watching like the pros fish up there, that how clear the water is, like what you're saying, at 30, 40 foot, and they're looking straight down even just when they're bare eyes and not even having any kind of technology, or even, what is it, the cone, the flogger or something like that,
Yeah,
without even having it. But all they're seeing was just, it just looks like big rocks just slowly just kind of moving on the bottom, and they're like, they're right there.
Yeah, me and Dale, we used to room with Shaw Grigsby all the time back before we got our bus. And Shaw was the best sight fisherman around. Obviously, he had some of the keenest vision. I still have 20/20 vision. I'm 71 years old now, but he was the best I ever seen at seeing those fish. And he sent me. We were in Lake Seminole one time, and he knew an area I was going to go be in. He said, "Go around that thing real quick and see how many beds you see." That night at supper, he said, "How many beds you see down there?" I saw 9. And he just started laughing. He said, I went around it real quick, and he said, I saw 15. But he was seeing those beds that everybody else couldn't see. The ones that are up there that are spawning that everybody can see, those are the ones everybody else is going to catch.
yeah,
He's catching the ones out there that nobody's messing with. And he
yeah,
knows within just a minute if he can catch that fish or not. It's not like you see a lot of these guys sit on a bed for an hour, try to catch him, and the fish might not even be a keeper. I mean, that's how much time they wasted. But he knows within the first probably 3 or 4 minutes if that fish is catchable. If it's not, he'll come back the next day and try to catch it. That's how he was so good at sight fishing. But Dale took me to Lake Mead back in early '80s, and of course I was a river rat, man. I fished the Tennessee River. That's all I ever fished. I'd never seen water like that down there. We got down there, and you could see the bottom in 40, 50 feet of water, 60 feet in place. Clearest water I've ever seen in my life. And I told her, I got out there on that water. She took me to Lake Powell first so we could practice. Lake Mead was off limits. And I told her after just looking around a minute, I said, "What in the world am I doing out here?" And she said, "Well, if you're gonna fish with the big boys, you got to learn how to do this." And
Yeah.
she was kind of my coach. She did all my driving. I did. I mean, I'd drive 30 minutes. She'd drive 8 hours. You get tired. I'd drive 30 minutes. She'd drive 6 hours. But she loved the driving and the traveling and just taking me around all them places and let me see what I could do. But that first tournament out there, I just missed the cut, missed the money. I finished 51st, I think. I just missed the money, but I learned a lot about it. Went back the very next year, and I finished fourth. I nearly won the U.S. Open out on Lake Mead, and I beat Don Ivino, the Doodle King, all them California boys. And you know what I was using? I
What's
was
that?
using a smoke glitter ringworm that you can buy 20 of them for like $4. And those guys were making these hand poured worms. Rick Clun told me, he said, I bought $150 worth of these 3 colored hand poured worms and I got them in an envelope. but that's what all them guys were using. And I had the cheapest worm you could use out there, and I beat all them pros out there fishing that.
Oh, that's insane, man. Um, want to get into a little bit, Steve, of your radio show, Hooked Up with Steve and Deb. Now, I've been on it a few times, and uh, let's talk about how did the radio show get started? How did you guys get started doing that radio show?
Well, I've always done some radio work. I've always, Evan Root always had these promotions. I was on the Evan Root pro staff, and I mean, when I was with Johnson Outboard, I was on the Johnson pro staff. Well, when Bombardier bought uh, OMC out of bankruptcy, they took 9 of us, kept 9 of us on the pro staff, and I got lucky enough to be one of them. I think it was Benny Brower, Guido Hibden, Larry Nixon. I can't think of all of them. But anyway, they had these promotions where the one that mentioned Evinrude the most, whether it be in newsprint or radio, TV, but you had to document it. They had a program, and the winner at the end of the year got their choice of, and they paid you so much for every time you mentioned Evinrude. So I wrote these articles down here for the newspaper, and I would always say, I fished this horse, I fished the East Fall for a while, drank that big Evinrude, went to the West Side Lake. So I would mention Evinrude probably 4 or 5 times. So I racked up a lot of points. I won that thing every year they had it by a month. And I started the radio stuff. I did the same thing there. Deb had all this stuff on tape. She'd have to send it to Krista, so she would listen to all these audio tapes while she was on her exercise bike, because she was managing the Everett Road staff. But anyway, that's kind of how we got started. And when you know we were when the economy crashed, I went from the FLW tour back to the Bassmasters, because on the FLW tour, you couldn't have a sponsor that wasn't a sponsor of the tour. So I was on the Kellogg's team there, but I had another sponsor that really wanted to be involved, and he was a home builder over in Cape Coral, Florida, and they were building 100 homes a year. And he wanted me to fish for him. So I went back to the Bassmasters. He wrapped my bus. He put United Home. We had the United Home Builders Prevo tour bus, the United Home Builders boat. Paid all my entry fees and everything, and that worked out for about 5 or 6 years until the economy crashed in 2008, when nobody had any money. I mean, everybody in the fishing world, all of our companies were about to go bankrupt. Of course, they went from building a lot of homes to not building any, so they couldn't afford to pay me. So here I am. We're in Buffalo, New York, the last tournament we were at, and diesel fuel was $5 a gallon. Folks, my Prevo tour bus, I got an 8V92 Detroit in that thing. It gets 6 miles to the gallon. I don't care how you drive it. And I'm about as far from Clewiston, Florida as you can be. I told Deb, I said, we get this bus home, we need to reevaluate all this stuff. So I've always done some radio work. So I talked them into letting us start a little radio show. And I actually started out as a 2 hour show. It was live. Now we record everything. I've got a studio right here in my house. So I interview all the pros here. And let me tell you, I get some of my best interviews. Like we just called Kevin Van, or Debbie texted Kevin Van Dam, because he's retiring, and you know Kevin didn't text her back. Kevin calls, her phone rings, and it says Kevin Van Dam. So she answers. He asked Deb, how we're doing and everything, and he knows we want to set up an interview with him. He said, man, it's crazy times for him right now. But he said, call his wife Sherry, and she'll set up a time for us. But some of the best interviews I ever got with those guys was in the middle of the night when they were in their trucks driving. 'Cause I called Kevin one time, and they just got back from Kentucky Lake, and he's going to another lake, and that's the year all the Asian carp were in the lake up there.
That's
And
horrible.
anyway, I've got him on the phone like at 9 o'clock at night. And he said, I'm going to be driving 6 hours going somewhere. So anyway, I had him on the phone for an hour and a half. And anytime he said something kind of cool, those guys are thinking while they're driving. That's when they come up with all this neat stuff. And if they said something really neat, I just jot down the times, and Deb would go in there and find it, and I'd put it in the show. But all he wanted to talk about was Asian carp on Kentucky Lake. So it was kind of a funny deal. He said, "Man, my crankbait wouldn't get down far enough because I kept running into all them Asian carp." He said, "There must be a gazillion of them down there."
I tell you what,
Yeah.
real quick, not to sidetrack the story, but a little quick fun story about KVD is I was fishing a tournament on Kentucky Lake, and the elite guys, their practice, our tournament ended Saturday. Their tournament the following week, their practice started Sunday, the day after we were off the water, after our event was over. And I ended up having a fairly decent event. I had a limit both days, but I mean, for me up on Kentucky Lake, it was actually like the third or fourth time I was up there. It was good to me, but I was catching, I think my limit was like 12 pounds each day, and I was fishing a ledge offshore. Well, anyway, getting back to the next week, I was watching the Elite Series live on TV on the website, and the cameras are on Kevin Van Dam, and he's leading the tournament. And I'm looking at the cameraman filming Kevin, and I'm looking at the channel marker behind him. I'm looking at the lay of the land behind him, and I'm like, in a way, it made me feel really good because I found the same fish that Kevin ended up finding a week later, but it made me feel bad because Kevin was catching 5-pounders off this ledge where I was catching 2-pounders. But yeah, that's a little side story about that. Kevin Van Dam was on the same 20 square foot I was in the week before. I found the same fish he found a week later. The only difference was he knew how to catch the 5 and 6-pounders. I was
Uh,
catching the pound and a half to 2-pounders, and he ended up winning that 4-day event too. He ended up winning it on
yeah, I
Kentucky.
was I was there. I remember that one. I think Kevin had a magic wand. He'd pull up there and wave it over that ledge he was fishing, and it just caused those fish to bite.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
It made
it
me
was a
feel
cool
good
tournament.
and bad. It made me feel good that I actually found the fish that probably could have won it for me, but didn't know how to catch them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Now, hold on. I got my brother-in-law's on here, and he always, if you seen my brother-in-law, you'd understand why he asks this question to everybody that comes on. He's a big old guy, so he thinks about food a lot. So his question that he asks everybody is, "What is your go-to snack in the boat?"
I hate to admit it, but I eat a lot of bananas. You take a banana in one of those saltwater guys' boat, and that throw you out in the ocean. But
yeah,
bananas are one of the best things you can eat because you can wolf that thing down, just throw the peel over, it'll just decay like the other grasses out there in the lake, and you can down it really quick. It's got a lot of potassium in it, which you need when it's really really hot. So yeah, bananas are probably they're my go-to food.
for all of you viewers out there that's watching us and believes in that fairy tale myth about bananas being on your boat, right there, Steve is telling everybody right now because he is one of the biggest sticks there is, and he catches fish day in and day out, and he has bananas on his boat. So that fairy tale myth is not true.
Yeah, we're always looking for an excuse. And I think y'all do a whole show on just excuses that fishermen come up with because they didn't catch them. You know,
Yeah.
And there's
Norm
people
and I,
that
we talked.
actually believe that. I've known some people. I've known some anglers that show up at the boat ramp and go through their bag that their wives packed them for their lunch during the day, and if there's a banana in it, they throw it away before they hit the boat ramp.
uh,
That
But
Norman and I, we've talked, and because we think it's funny that we like the weigh-in chatter when you're in a weigh-in line and stuff like that, and you hear all the excuses. Man, I had a 7-pounder at the boat. I lost it at the boat. Or man, my hook sucked, or something happened. It's something was wrong besides themselves.
there's always a reason for not winning. But
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's a big thing. That's one thing the pros do that the average weekend fishermen don't do. We make sure anything that we can control, we take care of. Denny Brower always said, people ask me all the time, how often do you retie? Denny Brower always flipped with 30-pound string, mono. He didn't flip with Brady. You can't break 30-pound string. But he had one rule. If he caught a 12-inch bass, he would take the fish off, throw it back, cut his line, and retie it. It's just something he did constantly. And I would sit in my bus at night when I was throwing that jerk bait. I'd sit in my bus at night. Hooks today you can't get them any sharper than they already are. But I would sit there with a little moonstone while we'd be watching a movie or something, and I'd just be polishing those tips. 'Cause I wanted to know personally if a fish came up and even smelled my lure, if that hook got in him, he's not going to come off. I'm going to catch him, and that's the thing. I got confidence. On the Bassmaster we couldn't use dip nets, so and I can't remember ever losing a big fish at the boat, but I played them properly. That's another thing too. If you got a dip net in your boat, everybody has a tendency to crank them to that net. They're going to start cranking and cranking, trying to get them to that net, and that fish is going to jump and he comes off. But if you play that fish properly and your hooks are as good as you can get them and your lines as good, there's a 99% chance you're not going to lose that fish. Play the fish till he just wore out and then flip the net under him if you got a net. But play him like you don't have a net till you get him beside the boat. But that's just one of those things that you can control, but there's a lot of things you can't control. And if you lose one, people ask me all the time, how does luck come in tournaments? Well, here's one of my explanations. If you pitch your jig out beside a boat dock, out in open water, and a big fish hits it, and he swims up under that boat dock, your odds are dropping down. But if he hits it and swims away from the dock, well, that's good luck. So even though you might not lose that fish that went under there, that's still, luck comes in. Another example too, I won the first Red Man Pro Am tournament there. First time there was ever a Pro Am tournament. It was up at Bugs Island, Kerr Reservoir, up in Virginia. And I just won Jerry Ryan's tournament up there about 3 weeks before. I told Deb, they were in the bushes. I was catching them on jigs. And I told Deb, I said, we go back there and fish this Pro Am tournament. We might win another boat. So I won a boat in that other tournament. So I went back up there. Water dropped like 4 feet. It was gin clear. I fished 2 days shallow, never had a bite. So I know I'm not going to fish shallow. So I tie my jig on, I put my pork line back on my hook, and I get it. I go to those same creeks, and I start getting my boat right against the bank. I just throw it out deep because I know I'm not going to catch anything shallow. Well, I round this little bridge, and I throw it out there. My jig probably landed in 30 feet of water. Got ready to move. It felt like it's kind of heavy, so I swung on it and caught a 5 pounder. Got my boat back in the same spot, caught another 5 pounder. I caught 6 one day, 7 the next day. I caught every one of them but one out of one brush pile out off that point where this bridge was out in open water. Now, if I'd have been a little lazy, if I'd have been drinking a Pepsi or something and gone by there, if my jig had never touched that pile, I would not have won that tournament. So that was sheer luck that I won that tournament. But that happens sometimes.
Oh,
Yeah. And I like how the fact that when you brought up that people are trying to rush to get the fish in and just to get it to to the net, and I think that's one attribute that anglers that are coming up now really don't have the incense or the to let the fish wear itself out. Let it just I mean, as long as you're clear, you're not around any kind of brush or downfalls or docks or anything like that. Let it go. And so they don't. I don't think they know how to really
yeah,
to manage to fight a fish to come in.
yeah. The
Yeah, I'm
biggest,
glad you mentioned that. The worst thing I see down here in Lake Okeechobee is guys that are bringing 4 or 5 rods with them when I'm guiding them, and they got braided line on every rod. I mean, that's the biggest no-no ever because you got to have line that's going to suit the bait you're going to throw. Not that braid doesn't have a place. If you're throwing a frog on Lake Okeechobee, you better be throwing it on some big heavy braid because you're going to get hung up in some pretty bad stuff, and you got to rip that stuff out. But when I'm fishing open water and jerk baits, it's about that line, getting your bait down to the right place. And two, when they hook a fish, say they're throwing a rattle trap and they got a stiff rod and braided line, they hook a fish, they ain't gonna catch the fish. He's gonna jump and he's gonna get slack in that line and he's gonna come off. But you got to have a rod that matches the bait. So I use a lot of fiberglass rods to this day. I use a 7 foot fiberglass rod. It's got a lot of bend in it. I want that fish to eat my lure. I don't want to feel that bite. People say, well, all this other so much sensitive, I can feel the bite better. You don't really want to feel that bite. You want that fish to eat your lure. And then if you
Right.
got your hook sharp, now he's got that whole thing in his mouth. If you're throwing a crankbait, rattle trap, or whatever, and now you got some monofilament line that's going to stretch a little bit. You got a rod that's going to bend. Now, when that fish jumps, you got that rod loaded up and bent. That rod keeps the tension on that line. He's not going to come off. But
Right.
the biggest thing I see, we're talking about these kids and stuff and learning how, is learning how to handle a fish when they get them in the boat. That's the biggest thing that scares me more than anything when they get these 12, 13, 14-year olds and they jerk that fish up in the boat. Now he's flopping. They don't know how to hold them. And I have to teach them because I'm throwing baits that have a lot of hooks on them. And I show them. I said, when you got a mouthful of jerk bait, you get them behind their head, you hold them a certain way. Make sure you've got total control of that fish. If you
Yeah.
don't even try to get that hook out of him. Make sure you got total control. Then you can get your pliers and get the bait off. But if you don't have total control, that's how you're going to get hooked. And as many years as I've been fishing, I've had treble hooks in me like 3 times in my whole life. And
Yeah.
it's usually from dropping a fish. Sometimes even a small fish, a little 12, 13 incher, you drop him, you don't have control of him, and that's every time I've been hooked. That's what happened. But teaching these kids to do that when you taking your kids fishing, that's one of the first things you need to show them. Keeps them from getting hooked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Um,
Now, when when you won the Forrest Wood and when you got the Classic, also was the pressure the same? That you did you feel the same amount of pressure, or what did winning the Forrest Wood Cup kind of help with the Classic also?
Well, at that time, I'd been fishing a long time. I've been fishing for years, and nothing really got me upset or anxious. Probably when I won the tournament here in 2000. That tournament paid $100,000 to the winner, and I know I'm in a place where I've got a real good shot at winning this thing. And the first one I caught him. I kind of messed myself. You can actually go on YouTube and watch those tournaments. You can go to FLW Tour 2000, Lake Okeechobee, and watch that whole show, and you'll kind of see where I let the boat drift in because there was a little current there. But I wanted that fish so bad. I did not want to lose that first fish. He was kind of in a place where there was a lot of grass. And then I catch one a little while later on the other side, and I hold the fish up, and I said, I don't normally get nervous fishing tournaments, but when you're fishing for $100,000, and all you got to do is beat 4 guys, those will make you nervous. And I played those fish so good in that tournament too. And I was in that yellow Kellogg's boat. Tommy Sanders even mentioned, he said, "Man, those fish don't want to come up and jump because I just let them play. I just let them play." And when I got them up, we used a dip net too in that tournament. And I'd slide that net under them. But man, I did not want to lose a fish in that tournament. But that one made me a little bit more nervous because that's the most money I'd ever fished with.
Right.
Fish for the first FLW tournament I won a boat. That was the first year they had the tournaments. They didn't know how big it was going to be. And the
Right.
championship the same way. I won another boat. Just a few years later, they paid $1 million to the winner. Scott Martin won it. He won $600,000. And here I won. But you know what? I still got the first one. Still got the
yeah.
That's
first
it.
one.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
nobody can take anything away from that. That you're always going to be known as the only one to ever win the first Forrest Wood Cup. But I want to talk a little bit about the boss, Deb. Yeah. Um,
She's sitting
we're,
right over here.
oh man, hey Deb, how you doing? Hey, tell her to get behind you in the picture. Come on in, Deb. All right,
Hey, I'm here.
there's Deb. Now, let's talk a little bit about you know, Deb really does so. I mean, there's most anglers, most professional tournament anglers, they have a great support system, at home, the whole 9 yards. But with what Deb does for your career and your business, the radio show, I mean, she pretty much does all the behind the scenes stuff. And you're taking home all the accolades for it, but Deb does a lot for what you do for your platform. And talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the biggest things was she kept she tried to keep my mind clear. So all I had to think about was the tournament. And we left here one time, and they messed up. One of our insurance agents put an S for my last name. And anyway, for some reason, we didn't have insurance on our truck or our boat or anything. I think we still had it on the boat, but on my new van, we didn't have any insurance. She would not tell me that, but she said, "Where are you going to park that van today?" Because she wanted to make sure I wasn't going out on some boat ramp where there wasn't anybody within 30 miles. So, but she kept all that from me, and that way I had to focus entirely on what I was doing, and that means a lot right there. And
Yeah.
and her and her mom, we drug her mom all over the country with us. She had a health issue one time where we couldn't leave her home, so we just took her with us. She was about 4'10", she's a little bitty thing. We drug her all over the country, and the Bassmasters, they called her all the pros called her grandma, and they all took care of her. And Deb and her mom would cook for us, like say me and Shaw and Larry Lazone and several of the others. We'd room together sometimes. We'd rent a house, and her mom and Deb, and they cook up some really good meals that you couldn't get in a restaurant. They cook a big old roast or something. So we ate good, and they took good care of us. So that's probably the biggest thing that you just make sure my mind was clear because man, if you're thinking about something other than the tournament, you might as well go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And even today, with the guide, and Deb books all your guide trips. There, you don't have to do. You yourself really don't have to do anything but go fishing.
Yeah, most of the people I fish with today, I fished with for years. I've been guiding here for a long time. But if we ever do get a new one, like some of my old customers, they'll refer me to someone. It may be the first time. And Deb is the best in the world at finding out what they're wanting. Are they bringing kids? Is their wife going to go fishing? Or, how much do they fish? What kind of tackle? Because that's something I need to know.
Yeah.
Right.
If you were guiding there at Roland Martin's Arena, you're just going to show up and you're going to say, "Here's your guide for today." You don't know nothing about them, and it don't usually turn into a really good trip. So I know I always make sure if I've got the ladies, I always make sure we're not going to be too far from the marina when we come in, take a little break. And I always tell them when we go out, don't be uncomfortable. If you need to come in and take a break, it's all about having fun.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Deb does that better than anybody. And I've had some of my customers. I mean, these guys, CEOs of high dollar companies. The ex CEO of Cooper Tires, I fish with him all the time. And these guys will tell me, said, "Can we hire your wife just to answer our phones? Because Debbie, you talk to her for just a minute, it's like you've known her your whole life." But that's one of the best things she does. It's just being able to make sure these people are comfortable when they get here because it's all about having fun.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So,
Now,
go ahead, Colin.
uh, we've had them on for an hour and 20, almost an hour and 25 minutes. So we don't want to keep you too much longer. We
Wait,
can
see
just keep
what?
on
See what we're
talking fishing on and
Yeah.
on.
See what we were
But
talking about earlier, Steve? You could just talking fishing, having fun, doing what we love to do, and that's talking about fishing. That 5 minutes turns into an hour awful quick.
yeah,
Yeah, I
now,
do a little live spot every day on a radio station here in Clewiston. And if I'm not guiding, I'll go in and sit with a guy there. We're supposed to do a little 10-minute deal on what's going on the lake. And it usually runs into about 30. And we get told it a lot because they got hard breaks they have to go by. But they ask me a question and I don't know when to quit. So
You're
that's
right.
one of my attributes. I don't mind talking about fishing. It's one of the things that I do and
yeah,
I love to do. And we want to encourage all your visitors to come down Lake Okeechobee and see us. They
yeah,
can find us. They can find us almost anywhere on Facebook or almost anywhere, and
Yeah, and
want to
we'll
make
make
sure that
sure that
Yeah.
we
And,
put your contact stuff in the description. So
yeah.
if people are down there and they want to go catch some fish, go see what how it is to catch some of them big old Florida bass.
Yeah.
you know
Uh,
when it's 10 degrees up there on Chickamauga Lake, and it's 80 degrees down here in South Florida. Yeah, people kind of want to come here in the wintertime. Best
Yeah,
time to come. But usually about November, first of November, our fishing really starts to pick up. And it can be good in the summertime, but boy, you got to be out there at the crack of dawn. And we're getting these thunderstorms every afternoon now. We don't even try to fish in the afternoon. But lake level is going to be high. It's going to be a great season here on the Big O this year.
yeah.
We're going to have a lot of fun.
yeah.
Insane.
And I got a question that it's on the subject, but kind of off the subject. When Mike Iaconelli came in and made his big appearance, that I mean, because he's not as rambunctious as what he used to be. But did you think that he would make and have as big of influence as what he does now? Back when he came in,
Well, let me tell you, I remember when he first came on, and he was a kid that was born to fish. He was ate up with it. He was the first one on the water, the last one off the water, and he was shy. He was quiet. In fact, he was on
really,
the Kellogg's team with us. The Kellogg's box I got right here behind us. Mike Iaconelli's on there. In fact, I just interviewed him not too long ago, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "I'm looking at our Kellogg's box that we were on," and but all that started when he uh, he actually took who was it? One of the pro football players, Deion Sanders, took him
no,
fishing, and he told Ike. He told Ike, he said, "If you want to make it in this sport, you got to set yourself apart from everybody else." And that's when he started doing all the break dancing on the boat and all the yelling and screaming. But let me tell you, he is high strung anyway. He is a little high strung, but I'll tell you, I love the guy. He's a great guy. And when we would go to the tournaments and we go to the registrations, when they would pull our boats through, and it's kind of like a NASCAR event. We'd pull our boats through, they would check it. They'd have the guy in the striped shirt making sure our numbers and our logos were in the right spots. And we pull them up, pull them in line. The kids that were in the line to get Mike Iaconelli's autograph were 10 times longer than anybody else's. So
yeah,
those kids loved him. And
yeah,
he was just great with the kids. He was just a big kid himself. But let me tell you, I saw him. We were fishing in Oklahoma one time, and he was having a bad day. We were in the same flight. He pulled him right beside me, and he asked me how I did. I said, "Well, I caught five." I said, "They're not big, but I got a good limit." And he'd only caught two or three that day. And a little bit later on, he beat the windshield out of his truck with his life jacket. He was, and some of the guys on the Toyota team with him, they kind of covered that up, and they're trying to protect him, but he just went off. He went Ike on him, and but anyway, that's just the way he is. He's a little high strung, but he's calmed down a lot now. But super guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see.
Yeah, here's the
Oh, yeah,
picture right
yeah,
here.
There it
that,
is.
There it is.
right,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right there he is.
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I was watching. I was watching just the other day a documentary on Ike. It all kind of cause was reflecting on his classic win, but they were talking about a lot on that documentary that I really didn't know that if it wasn't for him pulling that classic victory off at the last minute, he was basically planning on quitting the sport the next year. He wasn't going to continue because of his personal stuff that he had going on in his life at that time. And I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know a lot of that stuff about him. When he ended up actually having that never give up classic moment there.
Yeah, I
But
think we'll all remember that. Watching him yell and scream when he caught that last
yeah,
fish. I think
yeah,
we'll all
I think
remember that.
everybody heard that.
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I got a
anyway,
crazy Ike story. We were at ICAST last year, and so Norman and I were just walking around. We were walking between booth to booth, and here comes this lady and as it got closer, I said, and he passed us, and I was like,
Nice
that was
long
Ike,
blonde
and
lock.
had a wig, blonde wig, and had a dress on, and had a hat, and uh, so old and Norman's like, where? And he went hunting around ICAST for about 30 minutes trying to find Ike in a dress.
Yeah, I class in a wig. Talk about the ultimate incognito.
Yeah,
Really?
Hey, talk about setting yourself apart. That's for sure.
Yeah, but that was funny though, and that just kind of goes to show his personality, and he just loves having fun. Even though he's having to work there. I mean, that's his job there at ICAST is working for his sponsors. It's all about having fun and having some laughs, and it was just hilarious. You know, when he walked by. Of course, I didn't see it. I missed it. I'm looking all over. But that blonde lady that just passed. That was Ike and Ellie.
I would have
Yeah.
loved to have
at
seen
least you
that.
didn't check him out.
Yeah. Did y'all go to ICAST this year?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, we were going to go, but it got to the point where so many of my old friends were there. I never get to see the show because I can't go 10 feet without running into somebody. And we sit there and talk for 30 minutes. And now I hadn't even made down half an aisle yet. We spent a whole day there already. So, but I wanted to see all the new stuff. The main thing I wanted to see was that new trolling motor that Powerpole's got out. That new move.
Oh,
That's a
it
game
is
changer right
nice.
there.
it's
Yeah,
insane.
it
Yeah,
is nice.
yeah,
We got to play around with it at the classic,
yeah.
and talked to them. And as soon as I seen it and got to mess around with it, I told Norman, I said, this is legit. I said, now, I was like, Power Pole, their motto, is total boat control. I
Yeah.
said, now they have total boat control.
From the back to
There's
the
no
front.
need to have nothing else. The only thing that they don't have is a unit, a depth finder, or anything like that.
Yeah.
And
But the thing about that thing is it'll do so many things. You like it can sit there. You can have a waypoint way over there, and it'll just go to that waypoint. You can sit down and eat you a sandwich or eat a banana while your boat's going to your other waypoint. But the feature I like on, especially being here in Lake Okeechobee, is being able to reverse that prop.
Yeah,
Reverse
yeah,
the prop, spin the ground. You never have to pull that trolling motor out of the water. Norman, you know how many times you have to pull a trolling motor out of the water on Okeechobee? You never have to do that again.
no,
mm-mm.
no, no.
But I mean, but it chews through some grass though. I've
Yeah,
seen it go through some thick
oh yeah,
stuff.
I had Chris Lane on. I talked to Chris Lane here recently, and that's what we talked about more than anything. And of course, he's a great grass fisherman, but he said the reason that they waited so long, I expected that thing to be out, 4 or 5 years ago. When Garmin and Lowrance and everybody came out with theirs, and all of a sudden the one that wasn't there was the power pole. And but the reason for that was they told me later they kept working on that motor and they kept finding things to do better, and they kept making things better and better and better. And now they finally got it out there, and sure enough, it's the best thing out there. There's not a
Yeah,
close second,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they're going to do well with that. But getting one might be a little harder because they're in demand right now. So
yeah.
I want to get me one really bad, but
yeah.
you
I
know,
know. I think I talked to Greg a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I think he said they're taking orders for him, but they're probably about 3 months out because they are so in high demand. They
yeah,
can't build them as fast as they're getting orders for them. But a little plug for PowerPole too. Get out, check out the move. Go to their website, check it out. But make sure you get your order in. Because they are in demand. They're actually getting orders faster than they could get them out to you. But get your order in quick because you know, the
Yeah.
longer you wait, the longer it's going to be before you can get it.
yeah, it's
Yep.
one of the best companies in fishing, and they're all fishermen. That's the beauty of this. Started out, with the Watts brothers helping them out when this first started. Anybody down here in South Florida knows the Watts brothers from being the most feared guys on the red fishing tour,
Yeah,
and they knew. They always told me, Greg and Brian always told me. He said, those redfish out there. He said, as soon as they hear a trolling motor, they know what brand it is. They hear them so much. But this thing is so quiet now. It is going to be it's going to be a real game changer. It
Yeah,
really is. And the power pole, we always said, power poles help us catch more fish than anything ever designed for bass fishing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's quiet, but not only quiet, it is the most powerful motor. Even on a low setting, they had it in a tank that they were for their display purposes, and when they had the prop turning in the tank, it was like a 25 horse outboard in a barrel. The way it was churning the water over, and I'm like, dang, that's impressive right there. But
Yeah, some
Ca-
good stuff.
we have a question, Steve, that we usually end each podcast with, and we're gonna have Colin ask you this last question of the night. So go ahead, Colin. Shoot that last question to Steve.
All right.
This is a question that we usually ask
We ask everybody
every guest
that
that comes
comes
on.
on. If you could have one person on your boat for a day to fish, they could be living or have passed, who would it be and why would you want them on your boat?
Man, I'll tell you what, that's a tough one. Uh, I I'd have to say I fish with. I mean, I fish with Chuck Yeager, the old test pilot. I fish with some guys. I,
Forrest Wood.
it would have to be. It would probably have to be Forrest Wood. Forrest Wood caught the biggest bass he ever caught in his life with me down here on Okeechobee, and
Wow.
it's in the Ranger Museum up in Arkansas right now. So if anybody can go through the Ranger Museum up there, you see a big 10.5 pound bass. That's the one that Forrest Wood caught in my boat. And, and here's something he said that day. Here's something he said that day. It's pouring down rain. It's cold. A cold front's coming in. And we pull up to the first spot. And we're freezing. It's cold. Wind's blowing. It's pouring down rain. And we're sitting down there. And I got Forrest and Jim Hudson, one of the guys that started Choo Choo Customs. I know all about Choo Choo Customs, but they're in the boat with me. And Forrest looks up at me, and I don't know Forrest really well right then. And he looks up at me and says, "Steve," he said, "You know what's worse than not catching any fish?" And I said, "No, Forrest, what?" He said, "Not catching any fish in the rain." And,
That's
and
sweet.
shortly after that, the wind let up and the rain quit, and we caught like 4 over 9 pounds that day. And that was
Wow.
one of the best days I ever had. And
Wow.
and luckily, he was in the boat with me. We're gonna miss Forrest.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. That's awesome, man. Great stories, great
That
stories.
is that is one thing. I mean, because we really didn't get to hit hardly any of our questions that we had because we just wanted you to talk and because just the stories. That's what we like about having. We have like a little guideline of what we kind of want to talk about, but once you get to talking or our guest gets to talking, we don't want to interrupt. We want to hear because that's how we learn. I mean, some of the stuff that you're talking about, I mean, it's very informative for us and then for our viewers and stuff like that because I mean, you're on live. We've had our guests ask questions, and uh, which I mean, I probably got about 50 questions that I did not even ask. But I mean, but that's what we love about this podcast is, and they know that if we can get their question in, that we're going to get it in. But just to be able to hear the stories and that how I mean, fishing has really changed over the years, and how like you've had to adapt to different things and still and and still when you're talking you have that passion, you can see it in your eyes and your face and stuff like that, that you still love to be out there out on the water. That's to us is what makes the podcast, is being able just to hear you and just kind of see how you're reacting to just questions or even just talking about fishing. And so
Yeah, everybody wants to learn. Everybody wants these little tips that's going to help them catch a few more fish. But they love the stories more than anything else. That's one thing I learned about on the radio. They love when we have these pros on. They start talking about the stories, things that happen between them and the other anglers and stuff. Man, that's what this. I'm going to write a book one of these days because I got stories almost. I guarantee you, I probably got 20 Shaw Grigsby stories, and some of them are hilarious. Some of them are really fun.
Yes.
Oh man,
So we'll
yeah,
have to come back and do this again sometime.
yes,
Oh
sir.
yeah,
We
we're
definitely
definitely gonna
will.
have to have you on
And
again,
we
and
we
we
gotta
might
get
have
you.
to.
We got to get you and Deb up here. Actually, you're originally from up here. We got to get you guys up here. Don't even need to bring your boat. Just come spend a couple days on the water, man, fishing. You got an open invitation anytime. Anytime. We'd love to get you out on the boat up here and continue some of these awesome stories, man. But every time you hit the lake, there's always another story. There's always a
Yep.
great story that's going to
Yeah,
be told down the road. So it's always a fun time, man.
So we're ready to come home.
yeah, yeah.
But anyway, guys, that's gonna be about it for tonight. Had a great time, Steve. We really appreciate it, man. It's been fun just being able to sit back and chit chat with you and Deb. Uh, Go to our YouTube Deck Talk channel, guys. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube Deck Talk channel. Eventually, we're going to try to kind of sway everything over so it's all going right through the Deck Talk on YouTube, Deck Talk Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And had a lot of fun, Steve,
Yeah.
Deb. It's been awesome, man.
Yeah.
Have
But
any last
And
things, Colin?
nice meeting you, Colin and
nice
Norman.
to meet you,
Always
Steve.
good to see you again. We kind of miss you down here.
Oh man, it's been fun.
Well,
I
I
tell
hear
you
that all the time when we go down there,
what.
and we'll hit a lake and stuff like that, and people just come up to us out on the water. Which Norman's got a wrap boat, and it's bright yellow, so everybody on the lake knows who it is, and so they just come up to him and start chit chatting, and he'll chit chat with them, and I'm like, Norman, we got to fish, let's go. I'm like, I don't get to come down here that often. Give
a
me your number and let's talk. You
A
can
quick,
talk on
a
the phone.
quick. This won't take more than a minute and a half. A quick story. Talking about my rat boat. Um, I first got up here to Chickamauga. Of course, I was starting to guide, but I wasn't taking trips yet. I was still putting in my time trying to figure things out up here before I started booking trips. Well, I met Colin, and Colin was with me one day, and this is actually before I started booking my trips on the lake. I'm still trying to kind of scout things around. And I have 3 or 4 boats that actually, if they had brake lights, you could see the brake lights come on as they're going by, and as they go by, you can tell what they're doing or poking their units because they see my boat. And I look over at Colin, and I tell Colin, I said, if they only knew I don't have a clue what I'm doing up here. But because of the rat boat, they think I do.
That's funny.
Yeah. So that's a little side note. But guys, thank you, man. It's
Hey,
been
thank
fun.
you all. We'll do this again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
And
it's-
guys, we wanna let you know that I am in the process of working on getting all this put on to another like another service deal to where we're going to be here soon. It's going to be on all the podcast platforms, as in Apple, Spotify, whatever other kind of Bean Pod or whatever it's called. All the places. Deck Talk is going to be on there, and so as soon as it is on there, if y'all can do like what y'all have done with our lives, get on there and hit. I guess you got to hit the like button or whatever it is. We'll have to figure that out when that comes. But just support us because I mean we've probably been what about 5.5 6 months have started this, and we average in between like today we had almost 1,000 viewers watching this live,
Oh,
and
that's cool.
so but we average in between 900 to 1,200 viewers in
live.
between there each week. So, guys,
That's
just
what
thank
we
you
want
for
to
what you've
watch.
done. Steve and Deb, thank you for coming on, and Deb, thanks for helping getting everything situated on that end, to where because we had a little technical issue,
Hey, you
but
always have to have a tech person on.
I'm telling you. So, but guys, we deeply appreciate y'all, and if you're down on around Okeechobee area, can you real quick, Steve, tell them how they can get a hold of you so they can book a trip?
The best way to do it is just to give Deb a call. Her phone number is 239-560-2704.
And that is Okeechobee Pro SteveDaniel.com.
Got you.
Sounds good. That is awesome. And we'll I'll make sure that I put that in the down in the descriptions also to where y'all can look down there as well. But Steve and Miss Deb, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to y'all, and we're definitely gonna have to do this again.
All right.
Yes.
Keep up the good work, guys.
You too.
Bye.
See you guys.
Tight lines.